Yes.
Have you ever heard of a band from Australia called The Scientists? Or like a guy named Kim Salmon?
I don't believe so.
They made like a lot of really interesting kind of experimental rock music in the like late 70s or 80s.
Cool.
And then I guess Kim Salmon had a whole bunch of other projects still active. But you know that guy Jack Habegger?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like Jack Habegger's Celebrity Telethon?
Yeah.
So this week on Low Profile, I'm taking a week off, and I'm just airing an episode of his radio show.
Okay.
Instead, because it's kind of a similar format, but instead of playing like clips interspersed, he just plays entire songs.
Okay.
Like maybe a couple songs back to back, and then they
like
pick up the conversation and talk about that era.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, I'm recording the intro to it right now.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
That's cool. I like that.
But yeah, I'm gonna play the show.
Awesome.
Are you gonna listen?
At 5?
4 o'clock?
4
4
o'clock?
o'clock to 5? I don't know. But you can listen anytime.
I should be at a radio at that time, and I'll tune in.
All right.
Or at least via the internet or something. But I should be able to pick up at a radio downtown. Yeah.
Cool. All right. I'm going to roll it now.
You're listening to KAOS 89.3 FM, Olympia, Washington. I'm Jack Habegger, and this is Celebrity Telethon. We've got a special guest this week. We've got Kim Salmon from the legendary Australian group The Scientists and The Surrealists and a number of other bands joining us to talk about just a few choice cuts from his career. Kim, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Jack, my pleasure. How about that? You're calling me a celebrity.
Of course, yeah.
There's
There's a whole lot that I want to get through. So I think we'll jump into the music here. And I'm thinking I'm structuring things chronologically
okay.
at the start, and then we kind of deviate from it later in the set. But I'm starting here with a Cheap Nasties song, which I know isn't your first band, but is an early entry in your discography. And I'm gonna play Cheap and Nasty, which I thought a perfect song to kick off the Cheap Nasties section of the program. Do you have any background that you'd like to give for this song or this track in particular?
It's one of those songs that I had the name of the band, the Cheap Nasties, when I found out about this concept of punk rock. And I didn't even know what punk rock was. I just read about CBGBs and this amazing scene and thought, right, that's for me. What is punk rock? I hadn't heard any of it. So I went on a quest to find punk rock, and various things came through because this was before anybody was like the Ramones was recorded. So I came upon the Modern Lovers and the Stooges and the Velvet Underground and the New York Dolls, and then I think I kind of concocted my idea of what punk might be, and in my head there was a sort of I sort of had this idea that maybe AC/DC, Australia's AC/DC, who weren't very well known they were big. They had hits in Australia, but they certainly weren't the international thing they are now. I thought they might have been punk, kind of aligned with a punk rock kind of philosophy in ways, and I sort of made a riff that was because the song was a collaboration between me and the other guitar player Neil Fernandez, and really what I had was that riff, sort of a power riff that was kind of like an AC/DC riff, but it had a bit of a chug-a-lug guitar thing that's more of a punk thing that I'd somehow managed to glean out of the Stooges records and things that I heard. So it had that, and a few guitar licks that I thought might work, and I didn't really have a set of lyrics. Dave Faulkner, who was in the Cheap Nasties for an entire week, and never really actually did anything in the band at all. It was way before we ever played. He joined and quit after a week after we took the Ramones album that I just bought and took it to a party, and a whole pile of theatre students that he didn't like were dancing to it, so he decided punk rock wasn't for him anymore. So, but he's, obviously he found his way back.
Right.
But he wrote some lyrics, and he said, this is like, your theme song. And that was his idea of a punk rock thing. So his was like real sort of dirty kind of, the lyrics are disgusting.
Right.
So there was those things. And Neil Fernandez had a kind of a 3-chord chorus there that was a lot more sort of, that was the catchy chorus. So it was really like we had a mission statement to make a punk rock song that was for the band, and we just sort of engineered it, really. It was like that. Swampland, a few years later, I wrote it in very much the same way. It was, although I wrote all the music and a lot of the chorus, it was very much, I need this, we need a bit of this, we need some certain amount of that. It wasn't like done in that intuitive, inspired way that people like to think all songs are written.
Right.
And the rest of mine are written.
Well, why don't we play Cheap and Nasty? And since you mentioned Swampland, why don't we have Swampland coming up right after that?
Oh, okay.
We'll have those side by side. I'll bump it up.
Okay.
All right. This is Cheap Nasties with Cheap and Nasty.
Always pop that way out.
You just heard The Scientists with Swampland. Coming up after Cheap Nasties with Cheap and Nasty. We have Kim Salmon joining us today. Kim, you were talking before about how the song Cheap and Nasty and the song Swampland have some similarities, but Swampland has definitely taken on quite the life of its own and is certainly a well-known song of yours. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Certainly. Well, for a start, there were swamps around where I grew up, so the idea of swampland sort of appealed to me anyway. I sort of spent a lot of time as a child catching tadpoles um, and little crustacean sort of lobstery things that we call jilgies, but over in the east of Australia they call them yabbies, but you probably call them, I don't know, swamp lobsters or crawfish in the States.
Yeah, right.
So, so when I don't know, there's something about that with the Scientists, I'm sure you know that we had a sort of a pop kind of a phase when we started, a kind of pop punk kind of thing, and when eventually we regrouped on the other side of the country, and there wasn't me and the drummer who used to write the lyrics for the Scientists. There's another whole other story. James Maeda was he'd write a drummer who wrote the lyrics, and we didn't have a drummer to write lyrics for us anymore, so I had to write lyrics, and I wrote the sort of things that I could write about. It wasn't because of my childhood in the swamps, it was because of the whole cramped, primitive sort of primal rock and roll, which is what the Scientists I thought were meant to be in the first place, because that's why we got this ironic name, was to sort of, to be primitive and caveman-like. Like the Trogs, according to James. But anyway, we sort of went into this pop direction because that was the way we wrote together. He'd write some words and it seemed to work. So you don't sort of go against something that comes naturally to you. So that was the intuitive songwriting. No analytical process in it whatsoever. It was just the way we did it. And but there we are in Sydney instead of Perth. We regrouped, other side of the country, new drummer. I had basically same kind of idea of a mission statement, and it was sort of, I wanted to have not just 9 parts water, 1 part sand, but I wanted to have a bit of rockabilly, a bit of punk, sort of an urban punk mixed with the kind of swampiness. I wanted to have some jagged guitar, sort of a la Television, and also if you kind of listen to Swampland and put it next to another Cheap Nasties song, Hit and Run, the guitar approach to that sort of twin guitar solo is very, you can hear how it's sort of from the more dissonant end of the Television kind of spectrum, and it's also sort of, they're quite similar. The Swampland one works in the same way. It was really like I took that with me. I thought that was one of my favourite parts of the Cheap Nasties, was that little bit of playing there and the soundscape that and what it evoked. So I took that, and I think what I had, we need something like a Donny Kid riff, so I put that in there. And I had a chorus, and a friend who played bass with me for a bit, he was good with words, and I said, can you write me some lyrics to this? I've got a chorus that goes, in my heart is a place called Swampland, and he came up with 9 parts water, 1 part sand, and all these verses. And I thought for the verse, naturally enough, something in E, because E's the kind of that swampy kind of key, and I just sort of thought chugging along like that would be the thing to have. It was a bit punk, a bit swamp, and I just sort of had a kind of a vocal for that I thought it'd be nice if it kind of went up like Roy Orbison would do,
I hear that for sure.
That I wanted that. So it was really like a whole lot of ingredients.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's okay to work to a formula. I mean, I tend not to like formulas, despite my band's name. But it sort of was done that way.
Well, that is a good segue into you were talking about some of your other forms of songwriting, and I feel like High Noon is a pretty different sounding song than
Yeah,
Swampland. And you were
yeah,
talking about that briefly about how there's been some different approaches that the scientists have taken throughout the years. Um,
yeah,
so I have in this next block, I have High Noon going into When Fate Deals Its Mortal Blow, which are, in my mind, are very different ends of the spectrum for scientists. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit, the progression there.
yeah. Well, of course, High Noon is from the earlier phase
Mhm.
when we were sort of like it's marked by geography a little bit. We were in Perth then, and we disbanded because Perth wasn't interested in a band like the Scientists enough to sustain us. There was some interest, but it just didn't really happen for us. We made trips to the east many times, or well, a couple of times,
Mhm.
and actually did well. It was sort of like we actually created a little bit of a stir there, and
Mhm.
we'd come back to Perth, and then suddenly it was like it all died again. So we decided to give up. But before we did, one of the songs was this song with the lyrics written by the bass player Ian Sharples, and he he was a little bit more literary in his approach than James Baker. James, his approach to songwriting was sort of like, well, what would Reg Presley say, or what would it'd be sort of very much like a pastiche of kind of '60s things.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
but in a sort of a postmodern way, it
Uh-huh.
was sort of a bit more simplified. So our thing was like, well, we had a song called it never got recorded called Pretty Girl. So we thought, well, yeah, let's also have a song called Girl and another song called That Girl. And then there's a song called Kinda Girl. So it was sort of like James went on this tangent of having songs with girl in the title. And they were very primitive, really. It's
Uh-huh.
girl, I want you now, girl, come on now, girl. It was wantonly primitive and dumb.
Mhm.
So you, I think he was really good and fantastic with that, but I think he had a sort of a finite bunch of songs that he could write. Really,
Mhm.
he'd already written a lot of his punk songs in the Victims before the Scientists, and so yeah, I think we were we're nearing the end. And I think Ian sort of was able to add another dimension in songwriting, and it was the same thing, the same kind of themes, but he was coming at it from a more literary perspective. So High Noon was, I think he might have been dumped by his girlfriend, but he wrote about like out of a western. It was so there was sort of like a story to it, a narrative, and I
Uh-huh.
like the fact that he was able to do that. And I love that bit of music, and I just chucked all my best Johnny Thunders licks into it. So, but I kind of have realised that looking back at Johnny Thunders, who was an icon and fantastic, and always will be for me. But I think Walter Lewis was always the better guitarist. And
Sure.
I was probably a lot closer as a guitar player. Not saying I was probably a lot closer to Walter Lure in my guitar playing. Not saying I'm lots better, but I think really Johnny Thunders was sort of very basic, and
Yes.
but what I thought were Johnny Thunders licks, I put my best ones in there and did
Mhm.
everything like that, and I was very happy with the melody, and I really think the song's really quite something. So um, that's sort of where the Scientists ended up in that Perth thing. It was in that phase,
And that phase
and
is very early 80s,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
it's really 1978 to
Okay.
1980. Really, even
Mhm.
though the Pink album that High Noon comes from, or the
Mhm.
self-titled Scientist album comes from, was issued in 1981. I just found out recently, but I couldn't remember. If you'd have asked me, I'd have said, "Oh, that's from 1980."
Uh-huh.
But in actual, because we recorded it right at the start of the year.
And that was released after that incarnation had broken up, right?
Yeah. Quite a while after. So really, we had a real lot of. We've written a heap of songs. There was like there's loads that we didn't record, and there was loads that we actually didn't bother to finish with. Oh, we got another song, and we just scrap them left, right, and centre. Actually, because we believed in, even though you might not see it, we believed in strict quality control. We know that song doesn't cut it. That one doesn't cut it. We're pretty harsh on ourselves with that stuff. So. Only a few actually made it through, but there was still a lot more than we ever recorded.
Right. Well, let's take a listen to High Noon, and then we'll go into When Fate Deals Its Mortal Blow, and we'll talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
Cool. So this is The Scientists with High Noon.
Much to do except sit around and watch TV. The TV showed me right from wrong. It showed me what to do, you'll see. Do not forsake me, oh my darling, because of what I'm gonna do. I put a hole in his sweet head now. You love me for it when I'm through. But how new? He's caused a lot of hurt. How new? But that you'll meet his doom. High noon, face down in the dirt. He's gonna meet his maker. And high noon, yeah. High noon, yeah. High noon, yeah. High noon. 11 o'clock, my hands are steady. I'm drinking rye, cleaning my gun. Though I know this town's against me, I'm right, so I won't run. High noon, because a lot I've heard. High noon, so that he'll meet his doom. High noon, face down in the dirt. He's gonna meet his maker. At high noon, yeah. At high noon, yeah. At high noon, yeah. At high noon. Town ain't big enough for the both of us. Somebody's gotta go. You didn't leave me much to do except sit around and watch TV. The TV showed me right from wrong. It showed me what to do, you'll see. What you did was wrong, my darling, but I'll forgive you, know I can. Your pretty eyes are well open for you. You'll soon see who's the better man. High noon, for the lot of hurt. High noon, so that he'll meet his doom. High noon, face down in the dirt. He's gonna meet his maker. At high noon, yeah. At high noon, yeah. Your pretty eyes I will open for you. Gonna soon see who's the better man. At high noon, cause a lot of hurt. High noon, so that he'll meet his doom. High noon, face down in the dirt. He's gonna meet his maker. At high noon. I can look into the future, I can see the past. Clearly, they just cannot last. I stumble and jump, I hear what I say. There's a million ways fate will make you pay. its mortal blow. From looking at the sky, your head is blood and it's the sun. There's 100 headhunters all headed your way, with 100 ways just to make you pay. Just wait till fate deals its mortal blow. I can see the past. This clear blue taste just cannot last. Somebody I'm gonna hear what I say. There's a million ways fate will make me pay.
You just heard Scientists with When Fate Deals Its Mortal Blow, and before that was High Noon. If you're just joining us, we're here with Kim Salmon, who I'm talking to about some of his great tracks from his long career. We just talked about High Noon and some of the earlier incarnation of Scientists, and now we're moving into sort of the next phase with When Fate Deals Its Mortal Blow. And Kim, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how this progression kind of changed your sound sonically.
Yeah, actually, just interesting when you announced us, you said Scientists, which is sort of correct, but there's a little bit of a distinction. If you look at the stuff from Perth, it has the definite article. Yeah. Whereas you see us we did that Ramones thing and dropped the definite article.
Took it up. So
nobody's ever picked that up. Ever.
So that's right. That's when that happens between the Pink album.
Yeah,
after Pink album, there's no the.
Now people post this interview,
we'll have broken it wide open.
We'll know now. Yeah, that's breaking news. Right. It is. You watch how things change. And When Fate Deals Its Mortal Blow. Nice segue. Well, it's an E, a kind of a bluesy thing, really, in E, and it's I don't know. I was really at the early phase of my lyric writing at that point, and in some ways, I think it was what I didn't want to put. I didn't want to go beyond what I was capable of, and kind of it was good because these songs are really quiet. They don't. There's a lot of mystery in them, and they don't really. I don't fuck up, if I'm allowed to say that word. I really, I think, Set It On Fire and We Had Love. I look back at those lyrics and think, oh God, just because I was so, and even Fire Escape, they sort of, they say something. They don't. It's not. It's kind of mysterious, but they definitely got something quite poetic. But it was like they were really. I was really careful then because I didn't have a history of being, a lyric writer.
There's definitely a big distinction between High Noon lyrically and When Fate Deals Its Mortal Blow. We're definitely getting a lot more abstract.
Yeah.
And I think that that's sort of a motif that continues through this next phase of Scientists.
I think I got better at it, but I think those early ones are good because they sort of are so sparse and they, I don't know, there's something about them. I worked, it didn't come naturally to me, so I worked really hard at it, and I thought, I wasn't doing big long narratives for sure. It wasn't like Nick Cave or something. Well, I don't think he was doing big long narratives then either, but it wasn't like that. It was something, it was like a bit of, maybe there was a bit of Stooges and a bit of Velvets and a bit of, but coming more from that angle than the pop sort of side of things, and I maybe a bit of blues too, with that sort of no, given that sonically and the way the songs were, there was a lot of kind of blues in it in that Scientist's incarnation.
Mhm.
So it was that time, wasn't it? It was Club and Birthday Party. All those things kind of got that sort of different versions of the same ingredients in it, really.
Right.
Cramps was very big on my radar.
Mhm. Well, yeah, Gun Club, Stooges, Television. You're naming a lot of bands that are certainly very common on this show.
Yeah,
It's definitely the world that I operate in for this show.
yeah. I guess I'm no different, but everybody's unique. They've got their own blend.
Yeah, right. So we're going to take a bit of a detour out of Scientists for a little bit of time here, and talk a little bit about your solo career and your work with Surrealists, and a song that I really enjoy from the first Surrealist record is Intense. And I noticed in your in the biography section on your Bandcamp page for this record that it singles out Feel and Intense as being sort of more influenced by like Alan Vega and Suicide. And I can hear that in Scientists, and especially in that next incarnation too. And I was wondering how Scientists and Suicide and your solo career kind of fit together.
Yeah, well, there's definitely I borrowed a few things off Alan Vega and Martin Rev. I really loved once I heard them. It was saying something in a way that I could relate to, because I come from an art background actually, and so Suicide really were coming from an art perspective. It was motif driven, and it was sort of conceptual, and it was like they'd gotten a rock and roll idea, what rock and roll was, and kind of turned it into some kind of modern art. They've stripped it back into so far back into absolute minimalism and completely recontextualized it. But they're singing these things about comic book heroes, but it's also about the American dream, but kind of also it's the other side of it. It's very cleverly done what Suicide did. And once I heard it, once I heard that first album with just that driving beat on Ghost Rider, and they just it was electronic, but it was kind of like a boogie. It was sort of like,
Right.
but you wouldn't pick that. It was like it was so many things all at once with having very few ingredients in it. But it was sort of what was between the lines with Suicide that was really where it was all happening, and places they could go and did go. So once I heard that, I thought, well, okay, they've kind of got rock and roll and taken it to this new place. I could take it somewhere else, back into the same old rock and roll instrumentation, but where having been it there, it was sort of like take it to another direction and in a different way. So it was sort of that's sort of where the Suicide thing comes from. And I don't know, I think when we did Human Jukebox, for instance, that was sort of took it to another level. It's not something that people really, so when they think of the Scientists, they probably think of Weird Love and all that sort of stuff. But Human Jukebox is like, to me, that next level. And it's sort of like, it's right at the end phase of the Scientists from the early days and
right,
or the 80s. And really, the Surrealists on that first album it's I don't want to be like Mark E. Smith and saying if it's my me and my granny playing bongos, it's the Scientists,
right.
But in a way, I'm doing the same thing.
Yeah. Yes.
It's
continuing that deconstruction.
Yeah. Deconstruction was huge for me. It was very much that. Panther Burns. They were probably the big ones for me, actually. right?
Yeah.
But I loved them more than anything because when I heard Brazil and the way he sang that, and just the way these songs, Alex Chilton as well, with like
Oh yeah.
and that was really the thing. The anarchy of all of that was probably the bigger influence out of any of those things.
And like you were saying before, it's sort of the same kind of building blocks and everyone's interpretations of, Panther Burns, Cramps, Gun Club. A lot of these bands are taking, and Suicide are taking these kind of rockabilly, blues based back to roots, even some honky tonk stuff, and really cranking up that intensity. And I think that you really hear that on both Human Jukebox and this first Surrealist record.
I think the thing about it is it's because, as I think Charles Shaar Murray said it in this article about CBGBs, anybody that fell in love with rock and roll for the first time for the right reasons, obviously that's he's putting something on it there, but it's sort of rock and roll. There's something about rock and roll that, when you first hear it, I suppose when you hear about anything that inspires you, but it's going back to that point of inspiration. And it's not that you want to go back in time and be retro. It's not
Right.
to do with that. It's those things. It's those going back to the raw ingredients and trying to do it yourself in your way and reinvent something. So that's what was going on in my head and in my world back then. And Intense was this song that I don't know. I was just wandering around the streets of Notting Hill Gate and knowing that the scientists were probably not going to last, and I had this song in my head. I just imagined it. I just imagined this would be kind of cool, a cool song, and it was nothing more than that, really. I had it and never really did anything with it until the Surrealists, and I just sort of said, I want this and this. I was with Brian Hooper, and I sort of had to, I was back in Perth. I found myself back in Perth and sort of almost ready to despair and give up. I was back in Perth because of a strange windfall. We got offered a lot of money to vacate our premises in Notting Hill Gate and thought, well, with this sort of money, we can't even relocate ourselves very easily. It'd probably be easier just to fly back to Perth and buy a house, which we did.
Right.
So that was it. It was it was some prime real estate we lived in. I think the Royal Children lived in that street, had a creche there. So
Oh wow.
it was that's what happened. So I was back in Perth and thinking, what have I done? I'm back in Perth.
Right.
I've heard about it before. What am I going to do? Oh, well, I'll try and start a band with one of my old friends, and I did. It was Brian, he was a troublemaker that I knew, punk rocker, and he who looked cool. And
That's important.
yeah, but I thought that he'd be a good candidate, and I tried to indoctrinate him, and I think I succeeded. But he had his own ideas about rock and punk anyway. So, but there's all these ideas that are on that first Surrealist album that I'd kind of communicated to him, and I think he's got his name credited because the bass line. I had this thing of a beat, this pounding beat, and these strange dissonant chords, which are now I know to be diminished chords. I did those and had this song, and he put that ding 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 2-note. It could have been a scientist bass line,
Right.
in it, following the chord progression that I gave him. So that was how that was written. But it was sort of about it was about a couple of girls that I knew. That it was. But I fancied that those lyrics had a touch of Jonathan Richman about them, as much as they were intense. There's a certain naivety.
Yeah. Yeah, I could hear that. That's sort of belonging.
Yeah. Well, it was just like this. it's intense, but I kind of can hardly deal with it. But I'm outside of it, and I don't understand, like Hospital or something.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Well, let's take a listen to it. This is Kim Salmon and the Surrealists with Intense.
The world when seen, looking through her eyes, was not the world of you or I. She was intense. 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 That's not to say that I thought she was bad, or even just a little bit mad, but intense. 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 And another chance. You have to live with this sad fact. The things that repel sometimes attract. The things that attract sometimes repel. You could find yourself living in your private little hell and loving it, and it's intense. 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 And another 10. Oh, that's not to say that I think she's bad, or even just a little bit mad. It's intense. 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 And another 10. Intense. Intense. Another 10. And another 10. It was intense.
You just heard Intense by Kim Salmon and the Surrealists. We are, once again, if you're just joining us, joined by Kim Salmon himself. We're talking about a lot of songs from his discography. Now, this next chunk of songs, I picked a couple covers that you've done. First of which being Devil in Disguise, and then Everybody's Out of Town from your newest release under your own name. And I was wondering, how do you choose songs to cover, and how do you decide your approach? Because I think both of these approach the originals in very different ways.
Well, everything I've said about the Surrealists and the Scientists, one of the big things that I came up with for myself is that I believe every performance anybody ever does is a salvage job.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anything ever goes really strictly according to plan. Even there's always on the score that the composer wrote room for some interpretation. Somebody's salvaging something. Somebody's kind of not getting it and trying to make the best out of it and throwing things together. The world's most accomplished, respected conductor is doing that. The players are trying to interpret what he's saying. There's an element of salvage. So, but to where I do it, it's a lot more obvious. And I kind of think that that's what I go knowingly into a performance, knowing that it's never going to be as intended, but there's always going to be something that you missed anyway. So I think it's those things in the cracks that, you know, if you can recognize what's going on in the moment, the spontaneity, I think there's some really great things, and it's sort of really. I try for them almost. I don't set them up, but it's sort of what those things are about for me. So, Devil in Disguise. I went in to that first Surrealist recording session, and there were songs that I didn't let Brian or Tony really know how to play. So I said, "Oh, we're doing this Elvis song now." So, Blue Velvet, you know, it kind of goes like this, and 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 it hit me with the surreal feel. The song was definitely like that. I sort of tried to explain to the drummer Tony what 7/4 timing meant, and
Right.
I don't know if I got it across to him, but that was just us, the band there, grappling with my ideas, trying to salvage them. I set the situation up. This is how I wanted it. I wanted the songs to be kind of not broken down, deconstructed, and the assemblage and the salvage that is occurring in that is sort of like it's you get to hear and feel the music being created, and I think that's what I was after, is to sort of have a spontaneous creation, like jazz.
Right.
But it's coming from that sort of place. It's not jazz, definitely not, but it's from that. It does have an improvised thing, because I think that's what's happening. And the scientists definitely had that, and it was acknowledged that we were sort of an improvisatory band in that second phase. People
Right.
cottoned onto it. It's just like, because you know, it was some. That's what we that was the joy of our music. Really, we reveled in never doing anything the same. It was just part of what we loved being, you know, coming
Right.
up with something new every time we played. So it was just a more savvy approach to that. We realized it was harnessing that whole aspect of making music. That's what is happening. And with everybody's out of town, the I did it like when I just recorded it last year, didn't I? So
Yeah.
it was
At least it just came out last summer, right?
yeah. So that's I was yeah. So what happened was pandemic. We're sort of all in lockdown, and you can't walk any further than maybe your suburb, and you got 1/2 hour, an hour long walk you're allowed to do, and I was sort of like going for a walk every day and just looking around, and I took lots of photographs of the stranger things that I'd never noticed in the neighbourhood, and I remembered this song from Burt Bacharach, Hell David, that BJ Thomas did, and it just used to pop in my head. I always loved it. It was before the pandemic. I imagined a neutron bomb had hit and there was nothing left, and he chanced upon the fact that a post-apocalypse world where everything was left intact, but there was nobody around anymore. What's going on? I always liked that song, and that's the way I used to feel walking the streets of Northcote, where I live. I sort of think, hey, everybody's out of town, and it felt sort of chipper because I sort of enjoyed it.
Yeah, right.
What do? You got to make the best of it. So I just learned that song. I just kind of learned how to play it. I thought, I really love this song now. It really means something to me now.
Yeah.
And I'd thought I'd successfully recorded a Surrealists album live on a live stream, where Rantings from the Book of Swamp, and that was really made up. We didn't make it up on the spot.
Right.
And I thought that, a pressing plant had opened up, a new pressing plant. They'd opened up. They bad planning, but for them. But I chose to give my stimulus package money to them because I think that's a worthy place to put it, and I like those guys, and in that plant, they had good intentions. So I thought, well, I could continue on this theme and put some more records out with the money that I'm being given. So it was my way of putting the money into art rather than
Right.
and I thought that was my statement. So I thought, well, I'll go. There's a studio. My friend has a studio, and he lives up the road from the pressing plant. Wouldn't it be funny, I could sort of keep everything in this little point, even though technically it's gone to wherever the cloud is, which is
Right.
wherever Dropbox is. So in some desert in Texas or something, God knows, but it's gone around the corner via that desert in Texas. So I went into this studio and just with a couple of songs, I just thought I might as well give it a go. It was just for something to do. So I thought I had not that much idea. I went in there and I just started on my acoustic guitar and played some drums and some fuzz bass and thought, well, slide trombone, slide guitar. So I really just made it up then. I mean, the arrangement, it sort of follows the Bacharach thing. It's attempts to do that, but it is it's heavily deconstructed.
Right.
So that's where that comes from.
Well, let's take a listen to both of these covers. So up first, this is Kim Salmon and the Surrealists with Devil in Disguise.
You look like an angel. You walk like an angel. You talk like an angel. But I got wise. You devil in disguise. Oh, yes, you are. Devil in disguise. Whoa. You told me what you kissed. You cheated. Heaven knows how you lie to me, but you're not the way you see. You look like an angel. You walk like an angel. You talk like an angel, but I got wise. You're the devil in disguise. Oh, yes, you are. Devil in disguise, oh. Well, I thought that I was in heaven, but I was just surprised. Heaven help me, I didn't see the devil in your eyes. You look like an angel. You walk like an angel. You talk like an angel, but I got wise. Devil in disguise. Oh, yes, you are. Devil in disguise. Oh. You're the devil in disguise. Oh, yes, you are. Devil in disguise. Oh, devil in disguise.
The United States makes up only 5% of the world's population, and yet holds 25% of the world's prisoners. Prison can be traumatizing, with negative long-term effects. Olympia Books to Prisoners works to offset these dehumanizing effects of incarceration. Since the 1970s, Books to Prisoners is volunteer-operated and receives more than 1,000 book requests each month. Sending books is one way to show solidarity and promote education. Access to books can increase a person's ability to succeed after prison. You can help support prisoner literacy and promote social justice by volunteering with Olympia Books to Prisoners today. For more information, visit olympiabtp.org or email olybtp@gmail.com.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Everybody's out of town. Seems like I'm the only one around. All of the streets are bare. No traffic tie-ups anywhere. Won't have to wait for a seat at the movies. Hey, everybody's out of town. Seems like I'm the only one around. Everyone's moved out from the ghetto, lots of space. Empty apartments, no more pollution, plenty of classrooms every place. And it seems like we're ready to give it one more try. This time there'll be no alibi. I'm gonna send up a message to Noah. Hey, better send some people down. Everyone on earth is out of town.
You're listening to KAOS 89.3 FM, Olympia, Washington.
You just heard a couple of covers from Kim Salmon. That was Everybody's Out of Town off of his newest solo release. And we are now, so that we've kind of taken a break from scientist stuff and kind of gone out of order too in the chronological line. And so now I want to do sort of another thing, a theme that we've been kind of doing, which is early to late period scientist comparisons. So I've got another couple of those coming up. So a couple of L songs. So first I want to play Last Night, and then we'll go into Leadfoot. And, we can sort of see the differences there. Is there a story behind Last Night?
The lyrics from James. Well, there's a story in that I thought I'd, we knew what sort of sound we had by that stage. It was a little bit, a year into the band. We recorded Frantic Romantic already, I think. I had this riff that I figured sounded like Badfinger.
Cool. Yes. Another band that's no stranger to this show.
Yeah. So I had this riff there. I don't know. Just the riff, just the opening riff. I didn't have any more. I played it to James, and he kind of came up with those lyrics. It was as simple as that. In his tone deaf voice, he's saying, "Last night you told me that you loved me," and that went with the riff. And then once he started singing it, all the other bits followed. He sort of sang he thought of another bit, and then I played the music to it, and those chords, I loved the way the chord, the sort of power chords fell into place under it, or jangle chords. I don't know if they're power chords or jangly.
Right.
Sort of hard to yeah, there was sort of a lot of things, and we kind of thought we needed a middle eight. We were experimenting with this idea of a middle eight. I hardly knew how to write a song up until then, and it seemed like it needed another bit. That's whenever you think you need another bit and you only do it once. So there's that 24 hours on, it's a different song bit. And yeah, it was just it was a pastiche, but because the scientists did it, it doesn't sound like Badfinger. It's garage rock all the way, really. I think that power pop tag doesn't really fit that early scientist very well. It's a bad fit.
Yeah.
It's because I think garage rock, which probably wasn't the term then, definitely fits us better. It's
Yeah.
a better fit. But people didn't know about garage. It was rough and ready, but it had all this power, this pop sort of stuff. It was like it's melodic, but it's kind of brutal.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier the jangle, and I think that that's an interesting thing about the early scientist stuff, or the scientist stuff.
Yeah.
That really balances like the jangle and the stomp kind of twin sort of approaches that, when we go to a song like Leadfoot, which will be up next, is sort of the jangle is no longer as present.
It's been eradicated.
Yeah.
With that first lineup, it was when we first got together, because another aside is a side story, is when we first formed, we actually formed out of this band, The Invaders.
Right.
And what really happened was the Cheap Nasties disbanded, and Roddy Radar, who wasn't called that then, and Boris Sudovic took pity on me and let me join their band, but I wasn't allowed to play guitar because I was shown up Roddy. So
you couldn't be Walter Lure against his Thunders.
Yeah, Johnny Thunders. I think, I couldn't be that. He wasn't going to allow that. But when James Baker became available as a drummer, he said he agreed to join if I did play guitar.
Right.
And when we had our first jam, I'd say to Rod, well, because I would, even in the Invaders, I'd be telling Rod, play this and play this. I'd be giving him guitar lessons, really, and saying, you do this and do that. And that's great, fantastic, Here's a fifth chord. I point him in the direction, go that way. And he'd do it, and off we go. And so I sort of continued that once I started playing guitar. But I noticed with the two guitars playing together, I thought, I could hear something really new. Two guitars playing the same thing.
Right.
It had a kind of a jangle to it, but a different sort of jangle to, it's not like the Byrds.
Right.
It's not like the Searchers. It's sort of like our kind of jangle. I could just hear it was just like a sound that I hadn't actually heard being in the same room with it. So maybe other bands had it, but I heard something really, really fantastic. And so we were trying to bring that out, whatever that was, So, but we went into the studio with this name producer called Rick Curtin, and he'd worked with Elvis Costello and Queen, and he'd worked with the band the Cheap Nasties turned into after I wasn't with them anymore, the Mannequins, and he'd had some success with them, but we got in the studio and it just didn't work. It was like I was playing what was it? It was a Les Paul Jr. So they have those sort of bridges that you can never get it exactly in tune, but why bother? If it's good enough for Keith Richards or Johnny Thunders, I didn't care. But he wasn't going to let that. He was saying, I can still sounds out of tune. I'd be tuning it. And I felt a bit demoralised. I felt like, well, surely I can play guitar. What's this guy telling me I'm a useless musician? He really was kind of laying on that standard of musicianship line. So he got rid of him pretty quick and got Chris Tuner. His name is ironic in two ways, because my name being Salmon and the issue about the tuning.
Right.
So, but he was the guy that produced the Frantic Romantic single, and he was just a friend of ours, but he's a pretty cool muso, and he actually was great for Frantic Romantic because I wasn't getting the sounds that I had been hearing in my head. This is my first time in a studio,
Right.
and I was like, this isn't working. And he took me and said, look, it sounds great to me. And he managed to convince me that it was okay. So just to put aside all my preconceptions,
Mhm.
to his ears, it was fantastic. He really did a great job, and he pretty much said the same. He didn't do much more than say, sounds great to me, but we needed him to do it. And
Right.
he was enough of a muso to kind of not let anything go past that shouldn't, you know.
Right.
He was the guy for the job. So Chris did a great job in my book. So that's it. So that was the story of last night, and we got we toured the East Coast, and somehow on the last leg of our trip we got to play on national television on this country's biggest pop show, Countdown.
Right.
And it was at a time when you didn't have to have pluggers and whatever. There's a whole lot of people that you need to get things to happen now.
Right.
This just happened. It was just Molly Meldrum, the guy that essentially curated the show. He heard about us, and he had some idea of what he wanted on the show, and I go back and look at that episode and think that there's us and Blondie, and there's all this rubbish. There's this other bands that are trying to hitch their start of the new wave thing. All of them failing miserably because they all look like fashion victims, every single one of them.
Right.
And there's the Scientists and Blondie that you kind of think at least these bands have an idea. They're kind of savvy. They know what they're doing. Kind of see that they're kind of coming from a similar place. It's different, completely. Like they were slick pop, but you could see that there was certain knowingness going on, and
had a vision.
Yeah, we at least knew what we were doing.
Right.
But so that's what I can see when I go back to that episode of Countdown, and all the other poor hapless fools, sort of people, with their guitars and their mullet haircuts and
Right.
Whatever it was they were wearing that week,
Right. So let's take a listen to last night, and we'll come back after we listen to Leadfoot too. Okay. So this is Scientists with this is The Scientists with Last Night. Coming up next is Scientists with Leadfoot.
Last night, we drank the morning light. Last night, bearing down. Diesel breath burns my neck. Black dry sky against the cold damp earth on the fire black sheet of nothing. And though it's too small to get crushed between, burn out apart from here to there. Bars out 6 feet wide. And blazing 1 foot high between blue white light. Who could argue with this guy? 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 Lights glare, eyes burn. Lips stay sealed to bang his wall. But a spark inside my head. But a spark inside my head. But a spark inside my head. But a spark inside my head says, it says, it says, it says, I could kill us both with 1 foot. Take our law into my own hands. That foot plunging to the floor. That foot plunging to the floor. To the floor. Boss Hawkins bearing down. His diesel breath burns my neck. Black giant sky against a cold damp earth on the fire black sheet of nothing. Enough too small to get crushed between. Burn out apart from here to there. Boss Hawk 6 feet wide. And blazing 1 foot high between blue white lights. Who could argue with this guy? 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 Lights glare, eyes burn. Lips stay sealed to bang his roar. But a spark inside my head. 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 Says, it says, it says, it says, I could kill us both with 1 foot. Take our law into my own hands. Red foot plunging to the floor. Red foot plunging to the floor. To the floor.
That was Leadfoot by Scientists. If you're just joining us, we're here with Kim Salmon. We're talking about all of the great songs from Scientists, Surrealists, his solo career. And we just listened to a track off of Human Jukebox, which we've been talking about earlier in the show. But Leadfoot, I think, is another great example of that real deconstructed sound. And there's certainly there's quite a thick atmosphere that is all over Human Jukebox that I think is a really appealing sound. And you can hear it on that song, and you can really hear a thick atmosphere that sort of permeates that record, that is really heavy and really primal. And I was wondering if you could kind of speak to that and how you kind of achieved that sound in the studio, if that was part of your live thing at the time, and how that came about.
I don't like correcting people. What your take is good. It's from the CD, the Sympathy for the Record Industry.
Yes.
Comp.
Right. It's from it's Human Jukebox 84
Yeah,
to
yeah. It's got years,
yeah.
and it's just the name of that compilation. Yes,
right.
That's good. Yes, because in actual fact, it was a song that I wrote well before that, but it was because I was telling that particular story and it seemed to fit in. And
Right. Well, then,
Um,
so yeah. So that sort of era,
Yeah.
that time that
Oh,
kind of
it's,
just
you're
grouped
not wrong
together.
at all. You're totally,
Sure.
totally. I went out of my way to create that impression, and it was because I believed it to be. That's where I was coming from anyway.
Right.
But you know, the historians will say, no, this was then, and this didn't happen till, you know, some
Right.
people
Right.
think I'm being revisionist, but I'm just curating. I was curating for Long Gone John for that one, so
Who's an Olympia local, so he
yeah,
might catch this.
yeah. Well, hi John, shout out to you. You're a legend. Listen, what I was coming at with the music was it was really like you got two notes in the main motif. Just it's really basic, and I found very soon after Blood Red River we'd done that you couldn't keep doing those same two notes without pulling some trickery with the rhythms.
Right.
But you couldn't do it in a way that was obvious.
Right.
So different time signatures was a real good way of doing it. But if you could do it, so that's in 7/4 timing, right? But or maybe it's 7/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yep, I think it's 7/8. Look, I'm not, even though I actually teach music, but I'm self-taught, so I could be mixed up on this one. It's either 7/4 or 7/8. But the point about it is it's in sevens. And that's how you kind of get it to sound a bit unique.
Right.
But it's a driving beat. It does actually sort of... So it's kind of like 3.5 beats or something, or, you know, it's sort of, that's how you get the 7. It's like if a bar was 3.5 beats long, it's like... It's still a pulse. But
Right.
it's not a regular pulse. It's kind of a slightly erratic.
Little stutter. Yeah.
Yeah. So that gives it its kind of rhythm, and that was deliberate. And really, it started. It was probably around about 1983 when I started. That's when I wrote it. I was kind of beginning to get a bit more confident about writing lyrics, and I think I thought a bit of a story, and I was it was just from night driving one time, and a truckie coming up right behind us, because as truckies sometimes do, they tend to, because look, you know, they've got a schedule, they can be a bit blasé about and intimidatory towards cars, you know. It's like,
Right.
this is for us, what are you doing on the road? There's a bit of that sometimes.
Mhm.
He was bearing down on us, and it made me think of Jewel, that film with Dennis Weaver. You know that one?
Duel, yes, the Spielberg movie. I love that movie.
Yeah. It made me so it was really just about. I just concocted up a story and thought that'd be kind of a cool story for this song. So that's where Leadfoot comes from. It had the truck had Leadfoot.
Yeah.
No. What am I saying? You know, that's right. The truck had Boss Hogg. And I imagined him putting his foot. I just sort of thought he could sort of do something. He could sort of. That's right. That's right. Sorry, I'm getting really. I've forgotten what I was on about. I could put my foot. He was being a Leadfoot, but I could kill us both by just slamming the brakes on, you know, and creating disaster. It's going to be like that. It was just a scenario that I concocted in my head, and that's what the song is really. And so normally, if you're a Leadfoot, you're accelerating, but this is meant just being the opposite. So that's what the song is. So it was just, you know.
I love that there's a little bit of Duel in there. That movie is terrifying. Every time I do any kind of road trip, I think about that when I see a big truck. Oof.
Yeah. Well, I had plenty of that, you know, because I've done that drive across the Nullarbor from Perth and back. About 7 times.
Yeah.
An uneven amount of times. And the number 7 is significant because of the 7/4 timing of the song, but I just made that all up.
There you go. Perfect tie-in. Well, we're heading into the final set of songs here, and I thought we'd talk a little bit about some newer collaborations that you've done, like the Darling Downs. I'd like to
Yeah.
play "In That Jar,"
Oh, yes.
which is from the first. That's from the first Darling Downs record, right?
Yes, that's
There've been
right.
3,
Yes,
right?
Yeah, that's right.
And that's a more country folk bluegrass kind of inspired project as opposed
Yeah.
to the other stuff. I was wondering if you could kind of talk about that a little bit, and then we would close with a song from the New Scientist record, Moth Eaten Velvet.
Awesome. Well, thing about the Darling Downs is Ron and I are friends from way back. I even tell a story about him on the Sympathy Records liner notes for Blood Red River. And he cracks a mention because we were great friends from back then. But it used to get, it used to be a bit of a script that after I might have done a show when I'd gone up to Sydney in the Surrealists. I'd see Ron at the Taxi Club there. We'd both be trashed, and he'd say, "Oh, Kim, we've got to do something together. We've got to make a country album. Let's do that, And but it was sort of like the stuff you talk when you're kind of after a gig.
Yeah.
So, I thought nothing of it, and one day Dave Faulkner called me up and said, "Kim, Ron's down in Melbourne now. He's settled down there. But he doesn't know anybody. Maybe you should just go and have a coffee with him, or just connect with him." And I thought, oh yeah. And then I kind of thought, oh yeah. Well, what about that country album? It was sort of like, and I rang him up and said, "Hey, how's it going?" And invited myself around to his place, and we decided we would have a bit of a jam, not with any pressure. We do it when we but we do it every couple of weeks. So every Friday night, every other Friday. I know how much of a life did we have to be out on a Friday night, and not out on a Friday night, but so none. So it was tragic, but that tragedy was good fuel for our songwriting.
Right.
So I just took my acoustic guitar around to his place, and and I noticed, as I suspected, I played a thing which became one of the songs on that album too. I just played this little picking thing that I had, and he just sang a melody over it, and we just taped it. And then we sort of, mucked around and carried on and did. We didn't really bother with it anymore. And then 2 weeks later, we did it again, and we did a bunch of songs. I think we do about 3 songs that way. We didn't really bother to knock the songs into shape. We'd just sort of make this song up, and that sounds pretty cool. We'll work on that later. I'll see what happens. We didn't even have a band plan or anything. It was just that's what happened. And then I got the offer to produce Mac Show by the Hoodoo Gurus, and I sort of took up that offer, so I kind of left that behind.
Right.
And I also had this strange project called Salmon, which was sort of like 6 guitars and 2 drummers, and just nothing but heavy riffs and no proper vocals. But anyway, so I had that, and I sort of there's a few things I had on the go because I was actually just doing it for fun. I'd given up on the idea of making a living out of music, and I had a straight day job.
Yeah.
But I'd do these things if they seemed like fun, and that was. But this was like a real job, going and producing a Hoodoo Gurus album. So I did that for a while, and came back. And Ron, who said to me, I went back there, and he said, "Oh, we've got to do something with these." And I said, "Oh, we probably haven't got enough songs though." And he said, "You're kidding? We got about 20 songs." And he played this cassette back to back, and I listened to it, and I thought, it's exactly as it should be, the way it is. I thought to myself,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, "You know what? We're ready to go out. We should just learn this stuff and go out there." And he thought I meant get a band together. And I mean, that is fantastic.
Just
What
that.
that is perfect. I couldn't believe that we had all that stuff. Let's do that, I said. And we ended up doing that. And he'd written on the cassette KR Darling Downs, which is a brand of small goods. It's sort of ham and stuff, bacon.
Uh-huh.
For KR for Kim and Ron. And that was all it was. And Ed Cooper had a gig, we got the support for that.
Mm-hmm.
And the booker said, "What's the name of your band?" And I said, "Oh, it's KR Darling Downs," because I didn't have any other name. And then we thought, well, actually, the Darling Downs is kind of nice. That's where the company was situated. It's a part of the Queensland heartland. It's a sort of a regional place, and it's got quite a country link to it. In fact, the head of the music faculty where I teach comes from the Darling Downs. So there you go. But it's just a region in Queensland. So yeah, but it just sounded like, it's sort of got a double meaning to it. It was a cool name for a band.
Yeah.
So we went out there doing a show. I had an acoustic guitar. I mean, I had not an acoustic, a nylon string acoustic guitar even.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't even have a proper pickup to it. It was mic'd up. It was basic as, but that was supporting Ed Cooper, and that was our first show. And somewhere along the line, we picked up the idea of wearing suits, and it sort of gathered momentum, I think. But and we did 3 albums. But yeah, that's the story of the Darling. Oh, but the story of that song in that jar, I don't know. It's probably on the second or third session we had.
Right.
With Ron, when he writes lyrics, he just sings stuff. He seems to think it's easier to make lyrics up on the spot than to actually learn them.
Right.
So how he got that, and Rob Younger is similar. He's got that same idea. They think that, oh, I'm so pathetic. I can't, be bothered writing lyrics. I can't get it together to write a set of lyrics. And I'm thinking, you guys are making up stuff on the spot. How can you do that? Even if it's gobbledygook, I wouldn't have the nerve.
Right.
So how can you? That's amazing. You can do that. So yeah. So he. So that if you listen carefully to the songs on the first album, they're surreal. They're quite the lyrical content's quite surreal. It gets a little bit more. It's a bit of both on the second album. He started, being a bit more conscious about. He thought, oh, I better get my act together, but he wouldn't. So we didn't ever really work at this. It just happened.
Uh-huh.
And the third album, in the days when the world was wide, we did write lyrics, and they're actually a collaboration between me and him, as indeed the music is a collaboration between me and him, because people think, oh, I must write the music and he writes the lyrics. No, it's actually a sort of a bit of both.
That's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, he can, like, there's a song called Still Falls the Rain, and there's a beautiful guitar riff. He wrote that. He can't play a guitar. He sang to me, I can hear a string quartet, I hear cellos, and he sang the cello line.
Uh-huh.
And and I just played it. I just played what he did. And then he thought I wrote it. And I said, no, actually, that's you. I wrote the all the refrains, the music, and those things, And I would sort of... there'd be songs where he'd be singing a melody line that was really the bass line of what I was playing in the guitar, and he'd just sing that. So it was sort of a bit of both how our stuff works. It wasn't just... And the last album, he thought, oh, I'm going to really work at these lyrics. I'm going to actually sit down. So we'd have a session after having made up all the music on the spot. We'd actually go back and, okay, what can we do with this song? And I pushed him in directions he never went, and I'd actually made up a few of those lines and things that sort of say, well, you can do that. He said, no, you can't possibly do that. That's wrong. And I say, give it a go. Try it. Because, and it worked. And it worked really well. And so Yeah, there's a song there on it with banjo on it, and that he sang a banjo line to me, and I attempted to play it, and that's how we got it. So it's it was just we got this stuff in it, but it's very different to what Ron writes, and it's very different to what I write normally.
Mhm.
So it's just another. It's like if you with an artist with different tools, they use different things, and suddenly they're producing different work. It's like that.
Right. That seems to be a bit of a theme with your work, is going for something, and then it ends up just kind of being its own thing anyway, and it coming out sounding very much like something new.
Well, I'm really a believer in getting out of your comfort zone too, and not just thinking this is what I do. And that's what
Right.
what I was saying to Ron with the lyrics. No, you can do that.
Uh,
I think because once you've expanded your comfort zone and gone somewhere, you become comfortable with it, and that does become what you do. So I'm very much thinking it's about exploring new territory as something as banal an idea as that.
right.
It's just I'm very much into that. Always have been, and that's sort of what's happened with the Darling Downs.
Cool. Well, why don't we listen to that? Let's listen to "In That Jar" by the Darling Downs.
1, 2, 3, 2.
Hear the wind a blowing, safety then sound. Only 'cause you're lonely, not because you're bound. Here's the thing I'm saying, softer than sound. Here's that happy blowing going round. Take the one that's lonely. Here's this thing I know. Only 'cause you're lonely, at least until it goes. Here's the thing I'm saying, softer than sound. Here's that happy blowing going round. Just take what you need and just follow it up. This gold mine won't catch there, it's captured in that jar. Take the one that's lonely. Here's his hand of bounds. Only 'cause you're lonely, not because you're bound. Here's the thing I'm saying, softer than sound. Here's that happy blowing going round. Just take what you need and just follow it up. This gold I won't get to, it's captured in that jar. Here's that thing I'm saying, softer than sound. Here's that happy blowing going round. Just take what you need and just follow it up. This gold mine won't get it, it's captured in that jar. In that jar. In that jar.
You just heard the Darling Downs with In That Jar, and we are coming to the end of our show here. We have Kim Salmon here, who has been with us for the duration of the show, taking us through a lot of great songs from his discography. And I thought we'd close today, we'd end the set with a song off the New Scientist record, Moth Eaten Velvet, which is a song that I am really particularly drawn to on the record. I think that it's you can hear elements of a lot of different aspects of things that you've done in your career in that song. And I was wondering if you had some words about that one in particular.
Yeah, I think if there's a theme in this talk, it's all about how the way the music's made is very much part of it. It's very formalistic, and so I guess because I come from an art background, that music's always been art for me. That's what it's been. I actually was at art school, and I dropped out after a year, and it was supposed to be a gap year, and I sort of. And
You're still on your gap year.
I got hijacked by punk rock.
Right.
Yeah. And so I've been doing punk rock ever since then. But that has become my art, really. So it's really exploring ideas in the way I would if it was a visual artist, which I'm doing now anyway. I'm back to doing visual art. So and very happy because that's what the pandemic did for me. What could I do? I'm very happy about that too. But so Moth Eaten Velvet, well, you know how we, the scientists toured, we came up your way and we, so Emmett Kelly took us around, he did a West Coast tour, and then the next year he did an East Coast tour with us. And then he said, look guys, you got to do, you're really going to get you to the next level, you're going to need something. And we'd been saying, no, we're not doing it. I hate it when old bands do latter day albums. It doesn't work. It's shit. They're always shit, it just it doesn't work. And we got gradually Larry teased a couple of singles out of us, and one of the singles turned into pretty much an album, and that's that thing with the formula. And they were really cases of us making records via the internet. And they were probably me making records, really. I'd get together with Leanne and Boris, and Tony had sent his bit over, but I'd write the stuff. And there was a couple of songs, one where Tony, I said, I had a riff for the Beasts album, the last Beasts album, that a whole other story, but I had this riff, and I thought, can you write this one, but different, and send it back to me? And that's, I can't even remember the names of the songs on the album, but anyway, it's that was kind of written via the internet. But in touring, I think I know Tony was very much thinking, it would be good if we could actually write together, which we didn't really ever used to write together. To be honest, I used to write all the stuff, and Tony would occasionally add something, or maybe Boris would have some idea, and then I'd build it into a song. But it was mostly I was the writer in the band of that thing. But it's just the way it was. It was sort of like they were the characters that I had to write scripts for, really.
You're right. Yeah.
They were like the material, and I was like I wasn't really one of the band, actually. It was sort of like I was a little bit outside. I wish I could have been. I was a bit something else.
Yeah.
But so it was like me and the Three Stooges there, It was a bit like that. What can I write about them today? And but it's sort of dynamic changes, but definitely the chemistry of that band is still somehow there, with Leanne has taken over from Brett, and it wouldn't work with another drummer. It just wouldn't work. So, but Leanne doesn't actually jam, so she's sort of not really a muso, but nobody else could do the job. It's just she's gotten very good at doing that, being the drummer in the Scientists. So we'd sort of jam things. So what the method we ended up with would be, I taught myself some drums, and I'd jam away until I got a beat that was, I figured was a good scientist beat that maybe we could hang something off of.
Uh-huh.
And I'd send it over to Tony and say, come up with a riff for that, would you? So that's how we made the bulk of this album. It was like, you know, and one of the beats, he said, well, here's something. He called it Moth-Eaten Velvet because he thought that he'd written something that was just a bit of a pastiche of the Velvet Underground.
Uh-huh.
And what he'd written was sort of like, it was like a pastiche of the Velvet Underground and the Jesus and Mary Chain,
Mm-hmm.
it was a nice sounding thing. And I listened to it and I thought, I like the melody that those guitars are doing. I'm going to work with that.
Uh-huh.
I'll throw the rest out. And I just, you know, keep the chords that he's got. But he had a whole lot of riffs. But rather than use them as a guitar line, I used them as a melody line.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, Moth-Eaten Velvet's a pretty good title. I can work with that.
It's a great title.
Yeah. And I sort of thought, there's a few little musical tricks there because it goes from major to minor, but it's done with a bass playing kind of like just 2 5th chords, you know, E and A, I think it is. And, there's a minor chord in there, and I'll get Tony to imply it with his slide guitar. And I sing as though it goes from a major to a minor. It's like I'm going to talk music, but I go from, when we go to the 4th, I sort of go from a major 4th to a minor 4th. And then, yeah, so that's what happens. And I mean, it's a real little, almost nothing thing, but it's those sort of little nuances that, as with the drum beat, that kind of make a band, give it its identity. And
yeah,
so that was really just that. I was just thought, well, this is a sad time, really. We're definitely in the post phase of the band, but we're kind of making this album, and I just thought about making a song that kind of had that sadness to it, and thought Moth-Eaten Velvet was a perfect vehicle for it. And just about having friends, and it's a sad song. I feel a bit sad singing it and talking about it. But that's how that song came about. It was just like, you know, the band really. As for all of Negativity, it's probably out of all of the Scientist albums, it really is the band composition album, because I wrote the drum parts, but Leanne and Boris knocked them into shape because they could come down from Sydney and you know, hang out for a week, and we'd go and practice them, and they'd sort of, well, we need to do it this way, or this is how, you know what I mean? They had to sort of put it together and assemble it so that it worked for them.
Right.
And it'd be so it was a strange thing of maybe, you know, I'm writing the drum parts. It's sort of like Karma from originally the drummer was writing the lyrics.
Right. Yeah. Now you're paying it back.
Yeah, but it was a different drummer and everything, but it's still the same thing. It's in the Scientists. Nobody writes what they should do. It was, you know, I wasn't allowed to play guitar in the Invaders. It's just everybody doing something not what they're supposed to be doing.
Right.
So that's sort of what happened on that album. But yeah, we were sort of like, a lot of it is really just me sending a beat over, thinking, oh, that's pretty cool. But it's very much like the band. When we had recorded it, we were just getting an award for in Perth. We were getting what was it? It was the Hall of Fame. We were in the WA Music Hall of Fame, and
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And we recorded our album. It was at the end of 2019, before any pandemic. Even though the songs sound like they were written in a pandemic, they were,
and sort of forecasting that pandemic.
Well, yep. Ask the scientists, they'll tell you. Right.
And recording it remotely is sort of what you got to do now.
Well, we didn't actually record this remotely because we were in Perth.
You just composed things.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, that's right. We initially the earlier stuff was done remotely, but this was very much, we we were in the room together. We really, you can hear it. You can actually hear a band.
I was surprised that when I thought you had said it remotely. That was a surprise to me. So it makes sense that that's not true, that you were in the room.
No, this is really like this is the band.
Have you been doing much remote recording, remote collaboration during the pandemic?
I kind of put music on hold, aside from what I've told you about. I'm not great with what do you call it? Digital audio workstations or whatever they're called. Even though I should be. I'm too slack. I've sort of gone back to doing visual art, so it's better, and I'm not really worried about it. I just thought music's going to be too hard, it's going to be frustrating. So I thought, nah, and I don't really. I'm all about the performance of music, so piecing it together bit by bit, it's not really that much fun to me. There's nothing wrong with it, and I admire people that can do it, but that's not really what gets me off with music. I like what happens in the moment and the fact that it happens differently every time, and I like having a more situationalist approach to music. It's sort of, rather than this is it and it's nailed and it's all so it's a conversation for me. So I haven't really done much of that. No, to answer your question, and negativity is really sort of very much, it's an album, a band in there. The ideas might have been done that way, but this is really like we were all in there still knocking it together. And once we'd recorded it, there was pretty much maybe Boris didn't think so, but we all just thought, Science is Suave, that's the one. We played it. We actually could play it at those awards. We just thought, well, let's chuck that in. We'll do that. And the reaction was great. I can't wait till we finally do get to play that one live, because it's an absolute corker to play. And that's one I'm really looking forward to if we ever get to play together again. But it was a lot of fun. And it was like, wow, the band's back finally after all these years. So,
Well, Kim, thank you so much for coming on and being a guest on the show. We've got Scientist's Negativity out now, and some Kim solo stuff out on Bandcamp. I'm not allowed to do the FCC regulations. I'm not allowed to do a call to action, so I can't tell anybody to check it out. But I will say, if you do check it out, you will enjoy it.
And that's not an order.
No, just if you decide.
It's a forecast.
Right. In your own free will, if you decide to check it out, I doubt you'll be disappointed. All right. Thank you, Kim. And this has been Jack Habegger for Celebrity Telethon. And I'll be back next week, same time as always. Hope everyone has a safe and fun weekend.
Well, everybody donate what it is you're after.
time.
I'm not asking.
To let them out again. I only want a friend.
I'm telling you.
I only want a friend. Faded glory still has story. No one cares for history. Doomed to beat it, then repeat it. Revel in the mystery. Glorious one song, it's our shine song. Be prepared to rule the day. When somebody knows the difference, people doubt it anyway. But there comes a time to shelve it in its box of my beaten velvet. But yeah, we had our time to live them out again. I only want a friend.
I'm telling you.
I only want a friend.
I'm not asking.
I only want a friend.
I'm telling you.
I only want a friend.